Are we alone in the universe? If you have ever looked up at the night sky and felt that quiet pull deep inside, the one that asks, is someone out there looking back at me? Then you're not alone. For as long as we've walked this earth, we've wondered about what lies beyond it. From ancient shamans who read the stars like scripture, to modern scientists decoding cosmic radio waves, humanity has always searched for signs, whispers from the vast, silent dark. But what if those whispers have already arrived? Not in the form of beeping signals or blurry telescope images, but in stories left behind in the strangest ways. In the dead of night, a couple drives through the forest and forgets how they got home. In winter, snow reveals footprints that no animal, no man, and no machine could have made. In a desert that hasn't seen rain for centuries, gigantic symbols stretch across the earth, clearly meant for eyes in the sky. And in guarded forests and border mountains, lights that defy logic glide silently above the treetops, seen by soldiers, scientists, and farmers alike. These are not science fiction. These are real encounters, documented, recorded, and still unexplained. And when stories like these appear on opposite sides of the planet, separated by language, culture, and time, yet echo the same fear, the same awe, the same unknown, then we have to ask, are they all just coincidences? Or are they pieces of a much bigger truth that no one dares to say out loud? What if we've already been contacted, just not in the way we expected? What if they're not coming because they never left? Today, we'll follow 5 of the most baffling encounters ever recorded. From a famous American couple who lost hours of their lives they could never explain, to a trail of hoof-like prints stretching across 30 villages in Victorian England, from the haunting symbols of the Nazca Desert, to a Cold War military base visited by lights no jet could chase, and finally, to a frozen frontier where glowing orbs have danced over mountaintops, under the watchful eyes of 2 nations at the edge of war. In each story, there is mystery. In each mystery, there are patterns. And in those patterns, we just might find a truth too big to ignore. So fasten your seat belt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you just might have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. Because the moment you start asking questions is often the very moment the answers begin to find you. It was supposed to be a simple drive, a quiet return home through the forested roads of New Hampshire. Just Betty, Barney, and their little dog curled up in the backseat. They had spent the weekend at Niagara Falls. They laughed, took photos, bought souvenirs, and now they were heading back to Portsmouth, but somewhere in the White Mountains. Their world quietly and permanently changed. The date was September 19, 1961. The time was close to 10:30 p.m. The road was nearly empty. The night sky above them was clear, stars scattered across the heavens like diamond dust. Betty was the first to notice it, a bright light in the sky, hovering, then moving. At first she thought it was a shooting star, but then it stopped, changed direction, and began to grow larger. She told Barney to stop the car. They pulled over near a picnic area. Betty reached for the binoculars, and what she saw made her breath catch. A disc-shaped object, glowing, silent, with windows lined along its side. Inside those windows, she saw movement. Barney took the binoculars, a former World War II soldier, a rational man calm under pressure. But when he looked through the lens, he saw figures. Not humans, beings, thin, gray, with large heads and black almond-shaped eyes. They wore dark uniforms. They looked directly at him. And then, he heard a voice, not from outside, but inside his mind. Put down the binoculars. Stay where you are. It was calm, almost cold, but it was Betty's voice, and it wasn't his. Barney froze, then ran back to the car, told Betty to drive now. But just as they pulled back onto the road, a strange beeping noise filled the car. Sharp, mechanical, unnatural, and then nothing. They awoke in silence, still in the car, but 35 miles further along the highway, with no memory of how they got there. Their watches had stopped. Exactly at the same time. 2 hours were missing, time that simply vanished. Betty's dress was torn at the zipper, covered in a strange pink dust. Barney's shoes were scraped, as if he had been dragged across rocks. When they got home, they tried to move on, but the experience followed them. Betty began to have vivid dreams. Every night for 5 nights in those dreams, she and Barney were taken aboard a craft. Strange beings examined them, probed them, took samples of their hair, skin, and fluids. They spoke to her, not with mouths, but with minds. One of the beings showed her a map, a 3-dimensional star chart, lines connecting various stars like trade routes. She asked, "Where are you from?" The being pointed to 2 stars. Betty remembered the pattern and later drew it from memory. Barney didn't dream. He couldn't sleep. He felt fear without cause, saw shapes in the corners of rooms. He began to suffer from ulcers and anxiety. Together, they sought help, first from the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, then from a psychiatrist in Boston, Dr. Benjamin Simon. Over the course of many weeks, Dr. Simon hypnotized Betty and Barney separately to avoid contamination of memory, and what emerged was extraordinary. Both described being taken aboard a ship into a cold, sterile room lit with blinding white lights. Barney remembered lying on a metal table, unable to move, a device pressed against his abdomen. Betty described a long needle inserted into her stomach. She screamed, but the being told her it was a pregnancy test. She felt their curiosity. They asked about her life, her world. They examined Barney's dentures. They were surprised that his teeth came out. She remembered their hands, thin, with only 3 fingers. She drew the star map again under hypnosis. Years later, an astronomer named Marjorie Fish analyzed the drawing. She believed it matched a real star system, Zeta Reticuli, located about 40 light years from Earth. Some were convinced. Others said the resemblance was coincidence. Too vague, too interpretive, but the timing mattered. In 1961, Zeta Reticuli had not yet been widely mapped, and Betty had no background in astronomy. Skeptics tried to dismiss their story. They said it was stress. They said Betty had read too much science fiction. They said Barney only went along to please her. But the hypnosis sessions told another story. Their voices trembled. Their bodies shook. And Dr. Simon, though skeptical of aliens, confirmed they were not lying. In the decades that followed, The Hill case became a cornerstone of UFO lore. Books were written, TV shows were made, and their story inspired thousands of other abductees to come forward. But the Hills never sought fame, they never made money, and they never changed their account. They simply wanted to know the truth about what happened on that road, in that darkness, in those missing hours. Today, more than 60 years later, their case remains one of the most credible alien abduction reports in history. Was it a hallucination, a shared delusion, a dream too vivid to ignore, or was it real? A moment of first contact, hidden not by governments, but by our own refusal to believe. Their story is not just about aliens, it's about memory, fear, and the thin line between what is impossible and what is true. And when that line vanishes, all that remains is mystery. The morning of February 9th, 1855 began like any other. A fresh layer of snow had blanketed the countryside of East Devon in silence. The air was crisp, the skies were gray, and the world looked untouched. But then, the first footprints were found. They were small, 4 inches long, 3 inches wide, shaped like hooves, but unlike any animal known to roam the hills of England. They appeared in a single straight line, as if the creature had walked on 2 legs, 1 foot directly in front of the other. No tail, no drag marks, just perfect, evenly spaced hoof prints marching across the land. They climbed over rooftops. They crossed frozen rivers. They scaled 13-foot-high walls. They disappeared into narrow drain pipes and then reappeared on the other side, unbroken, unexplained. In some villages, they passed through churchyards. In others, they cut straight through fields and gardens. No one had heard a sound. No one had seen a thing. The trail stretched for more than 100 kilometers, through over 30 villages, over hills, across farms, into forests, and back again. People were terrified. Some believed the devil himself had walked through Devon that night. They pointed to the cloven hoof, a biblical symbol of Satan. They remembered sermons, warnings of punishment, visions of judgment. Churches filled that Sunday. Ministers preached fire and fear. Parents warned their children, and whispers spread like wildfire. But not everyone believed it was demonic. Scientists, hunters, skeptics, they all came to investigate. One biologist, Richard Owen, suggested badgers. But badgers can't climb rooftops. They can't leap over walls. And they certainly can't walk in perfect lines for miles on end. Others blamed mice. Field mice hopping through snow can sometimes leave small marks, but no mouse could travel such distance or cross such obstacles, especially not in a single night. Some thought it was a kangaroo escaped from a private menagerie, but no kangaroo had been reported missing, and the footprints were too small, too precise, too widespread. A few suggested it was a prank, someone with a tool stamping hoof prints into the snow. But who could travel 100 kilometers in a single night, across ice, wind, and steep terrain without leaving their own tracks behind? And even if they could, why? Then came the stranger theories that it was not an animal, not a man, but something else. Something not from this world. Some believed the creature had the ability to change shape, to move through walls, to teleport, or to vanish, and reappear where it pleased, Others suggested a flying machine, that it hovered above the ground, touching down briefly, leaving marks, then lifting off again. But in 1855, there were no aircraft, no drones, no satellites, just stories and fear. In the years that followed, the prints became legend. The devil's footprints passed down through generations, retold every winter when the snow falls silently and the world waits. But not all stories stayed in Devon. In 2009, similar marks were discovered in North Devon. Again, no explanation, no witnesses, just tracks. Some called it coincidence. Others said the being had returned. A few compared the event to UFO sightings, suggesting that the footprints might not be footprints at all, but the landing marks of something alien, something watching. There were no strange lights in the sky that night, no missing time, no eyewitnesses, but the feeling was the same: unease. A sense that something had touched the earth and left without a trace, except for the trail. To this day, no definitive explanation has ever been found, not for the marks, not for the distance, not for the silence. Some say it was Satan, others say it was science, and a few still believe it was something in between. But one truth remains. In the snow-covered hills of East Devon, one night in 1855, something walked, and it has never returned, or perhaps it never left. And when the snow falls again, people still look down, hoping not to see the prints, but dreading that they might. Because the moment you try to explain the impossible, you open the door to something far more terrifying: the possibility that it really happened. There is a place on Earth that feels more like the surface of another planet, a silent desert where the wind never rests, where the sun scorches the bones of the land, and the horizon stretches in every direction without end. This is the Nazca Plateau, a vast plain tucked between the towns of Nazca and Palpa in southern Peru, a place so dry that some parts haven't seen rain in hundreds of years, a place where time stands still, and yet a place marked by movement, lines, spirals, symbols etched across the ground as if drawn by the hand of a giant. From the ground, they are just shallow trenches, scraped into the sunburned crust of the earth. But from the sky, they come alive. A hummingbird with wings stretching over 300 feet. A spider, perfectly detailed with joints and curves found only in rare Amazonian species. A monkey with a curling tail. A man with outstretched arms and a head too large for a human body. There are over 800 straight lines, over 300 geometric shapes, and more than 70 animals and humanoid figures, all carved into the desert floor, without machines, without satellites, without even the wheel. The Nazca people created these geoglyphs between 500 BCE and 500 CE, long before airplanes, long before telescopes, and yet, the only way to fully see them is from the sky. That single fact has sparked decades of questions. Why would an ancient civilization draw messages that no one could read unless they could fly? Some believe the lines were part of religious ceremonies, offerings to the gods of the sky, symbolic paths walked during rituals, or prayers carved into the earth, meant to be seen by divine eyes above. Others suggest the lines are an astronomical calendar, alignments with the sun, the moon, and the stars, marking solstices, eclipses, harvest seasons, or cosmic events now forgotten. A German mathematician named Maria Reich dedicated her life to this idea. She mapped every line, measured every angle, and believed that the geoglyphs were a great observatory, built not with stone, but with dust. But the evidence is inconsistent. Not all lines point to celestial events. Not all figures align with constellations, and some seem to lead nowhere. So the mystery deepens, if not for gods and not for the stars. Then who were they for? Some theorists offer a controversial answer: aliens. They say the Nazca Lines are not symbols, but signals, that the desert was an ancient runway, that the long straight lines were landing guides, and that the giant figures were messages of welcome or warning. They point to the precision of the lines, how they never wobble, how they stretch for miles, how some images are anatomically perfect, like the spider, whose reproductive organ is shown in the correct location, even though that detail can only be seen under a microscope. They also mention the magnetic field. Nazca has a geomagnetic anomaly. Its electrical conductivity is over 800 times higher than the surrounding desert. No one knows why or what it means, but it suggests something strange, something unseen, lurking beneath the surface. Could the Nazca people have discovered a natural force, a forgotten energy, a resonance with the earth that modern science has overlooked? Or were they guided by someone or something? Drones and satellite imaging have uncovered more than 300 new geoglyphs, some never seen before, including a pair of two-headed snakes and humanoid shapes with large, triangular heads. As the number of figures grows, so do the questions. No bodies have ever been found near the geoglyphs. No settlements, no tools, no temples, just open desert and lines. Were they built to be seen by ancient gods or something far beyond human reach? Were they acts of devotion or communication? And if they were messages, then what did they say? And who were they for to this day? No theory fits perfectly. The lines are too vast, too precise, too enduring. They cannot be explained away as random art. They cannot be dismissed as simple paths. They remain unanswered, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the Nazca Lines were never meant to be understood, only seen. Seen by the stars, seen by time, seen by us. They are one of humanity's greatest enigmas, not because they defy science, but because they invite wonder, and wonder is the beginning of wisdom. So we look down from the sky onto a desert that still listens, still remembers, still holds its secrets tight beneath a skin of stone. And as long as the winds of Nazca do not erase them, we will continue to ask the same question, not just how, but why. Because the moment we stop asking why is the moment we forget what it means to be human. December 1980. The Cold War was at its peak. England stood on alert. American air bases on British soil buzzed with quiet tension. The world was holding its breath. And then, in the woods, something broke the silence. The place was Rendlesham Forest, a dense woodland in Suffolk, nestled between two military bases, RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwaters. bases operated by the United States Air Force, with nuclear weapons rumored to be stored on site. In the early hours of December 26th, security patrols at Woodbridge saw lights, red, blue, white, beams of color moving silently through the trees. At first, they thought it was a downed aircraft, a crash, a fire, a threat. Sergeant Jim Peniston and Airman John Burroughs were sent to investigate. They drove into the forest, expecting wreckage. Instead, they found something else. Hovering above the forest floor was a craft, triangular, metallic, glowing softly, silent. Peniston approached. He later said he touched it, felt the warmth of its surface, and saw symbols, strange markings like hieroglyphs, etched into the hull. Then, a burst of light, and it vanished, gone without a sound, leaving only a disturbed clearing behind. Back at base, the men filed a report. They described what they saw as a mechanical object, but their superiors ordered silence. No further action was taken officially, but the forest wasn't finished. 2 nights later, it returned. This time, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt took the lead. He assembled a small team. Armed with flashlights, Geiger counters, and an audio recorder, they entered the woods. What they witnessed that night became legend. Bright beams of light darted between the trees. A glowing red orb hovered above the canopy. It pulsed like it was alive. Then a narrow beam shot down to the ground just feet from where they stood. No heat, no impact, just light, targeted, intelligent. They found indentations in the soil, 3 of them, forming a perfect triangle, as if something had landed and left behind its footprint. The Geiger counter registered radiation, levels 10 times higher than normal, enough to raise alarm, but not enough to trigger evacuation. Halt dictated everything into his recorder, a moment-by-moment account. His voice was steady, but underneath it, tension grew. Over the years, that recording became a key piece of evidence, a snapshot of fear, confusion, and awe. But what really happened that night, and who else knew? The Ministry of Defense opened a file, but later declared the event posed no threat to national security. No further investigation, no explanation, no answers. In 1983, Halt's official memo was leaked. The public became aware, and the legend of Rendlesham Forest was born, but the testimonies did not agree. Peniston changed his story. Years later, he claimed the symbols he saw were part of a binary code, messages that were downloaded into his mind. He said the craft came not from space, but from the future. Burroughs remembered little. He suffered health issues in the following years. Radiation exposure was suspected, but medical records were sealed. Some still are. Larry Warren, another airman, claimed to see beings, entities near the craft. He described them as humanoid, thin, glowing, but others disputed his account, said he wasn't even there that night. The truth blurred, the facts twisted over time. More files were declassified, but key pages were missing, blanked out, gone, as if someone didn't want them read. Skeptics emerged. They said the lights were from the Orford Ness Lighthouse. It flashes every 5 seconds, just like the patterns reported. They said the indentations were from animals or vehicles, that the radiation was natural or a malfunction. But others disagreed. They pointed to the pattern, the coordination, the witnesses, trained military personnel with no reason to lie. In 2010, Halt signed an affidavit stating under oath that what he saw was a craft of unknown origin, that it demonstrated intelligent control, that it was not of this earth. To this day, Rendlesham remains unsolved. No photographs, no debris, no confirmed radar data, just testimony, documents, and a forest that still remembers. Visitors claim to feel watched, equipment malfunctions, animals avoid certain paths. The triangle is still there, marked by time and by belief. Was it alien? Was it secret technology? Was it mass confusion or something else entirely? One event, 2 nights, dozens of witnesses and no clear answers. That is the curse of the unexplained. It offers no closure, only questions and shadows. In Rendlesham Forest, something happened, something powerful, something intelligent, and perhaps something we were never meant to see. In August 2011, a quiet alarm began to sound in one of the world's most remote and dangerous regions, along the icy border between India and China, high in the Himalayas. Soldiers started to see things they could not explain. It began with lights, small at first, flickering orbs floating in the night sky. They would hover, then drift, then disappear. No noise, no heat, no trail. Indian border patrols thought it was a drone or maybe a flare, but the lights kept coming, night after night, sometimes in clusters, sometimes alone. They defied wind, ignored gravity, and moved like they had a mind of their own. Radar could not detect them. Thermal cameras picked up nothing unusual, but human eyes could see them clearly. The sightings centered around the Thakung region in Ladakh, close to the disputed territory of Aksai Chin, a place where 2 nuclear powers stand face to face, a place where any misunderstanding can become war. Villagers noticed the lights too, fishermen by the lakes, goat herds on the cliffs. They spoke of glowing spheres that hovered above the mountains or floated across water, then blinked out without a sound. For the locals, it was not just new, it was familiar. They remembered ancient stories, legends passed down for generations, of sky spirits, of moving stars, of lights that come when danger is near. But this was not folklore anymore. This was military concern. Both India and China began investigating. China never admitted anything officially, but rumors said they reached out to NASA, asked for satellite scans, asked if they had launched anything nearby. NASA said nothing, or perhaps knew nothing. India sent teams from its Institute of Astrophysics and its National Observatory. They observed the lights for days, measured radiation, tracked magnetic interference, tried to explain, but found no answers. The conclusion was vague. Some scientists said it might be plasma, a natural phenomenon caused by friction between tectonic plates and magnetic fields, known as Earth lights. But the explanation did not sit well, because plasma doesn't move with precision. It doesn't rise, pause, circle, then vanish on cue. The orbs returned again in early 2012. More sightings, more reports, but no proof. No footage that could not be debated. No radar lock, just human eyes and silence. Some theorists suggested it was a secret Chinese weapon, experimental drones, used to provoke, to test reactions, to watch without being seen, but others had a different idea, a bolder one. They said the Himalayas might be hiding something, something not built by humans, a base, buried beneath the mountains, shielded by nature, and protected by belief. Some linked the sightings to ancient myths of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom said to be protected by celestial beings, a place unreachable by normal means, but always watching. Others recalled stories of the Yeti, not as a beast, but as a guardian, a creature sent by forces beyond Earth, to guard a secret. Could the lights be connected to something older than civilization, something watching from above, or waiting below? UFO researchers around the world began to take notice. They compared it to the Rendlesham Forest incident, to the Phoenix Lights, to orbs seen near nuclear facilities in the United States, and the pattern grew darker. These orbs often appeared in tense regions, near weapons, near borders, as if they were monitoring or warning. But there was no contact, no message, no sound, only presence. Skeptics argued it was mass hysteria, that harsh conditions, thin air, and stress caused hallucinations. But hallucinations do not appear on multiple nights. To trained soldiers, to villagers, to scientists, over 100 independent reports were filed from both military and civilian sources. Many included sketches, descriptions, timelines, but no one could act because no one could prove. And in places like the Himalayas, even the truth can freeze to death. To this day, no country has claimed responsibility. No technology has matched the movement. No footage has offered clarity, just stories, orbs, silence, and a question. That still hangs in the cold mountain air. What if the lights are not watching the land, but the people? What if they are not here to attack, but to observe? Because sometimes the greatest secrets are not hidden underground. They are floating right in front of us, begging not to be understood, but to be noticed. And maybe that's all they ever wanted. From quiet highways in New England to windswept villages of Victorian England, from the blazing deserts of Peru to the silent forests of Suffolk and the sacred peaks of the Himalayas, one pattern repeats itself: lights, voices, symbols, and silence. No matter the culture, no matter the century, something or someone keeps showing up. They do not speak, but they leave traces. They do not stay, but they make sure we remember. The couple who lost hours they couldn't explain. The prints that defied nature. The drawings that begged to be seen from the sky. The craft that danced through the trees. And the orbs that glowed where soldiers dare not speak. Different stories, different lands, but the same echo. We are not alone. And maybe we were never meant to be, but that raises a deeper question. Why now? Why here? Why us? Are we being tested or guided, observed or warned? What if every unexplained light, every forgotten symbol, every chilling dream is not a glitch in the fabric of reality, but a crack through which something else is peeking in, something ancient, something intelligent, something watching? And maybe it's not about belief anymore. Maybe it's about attention. Because the moment we start asking, really asking, we stop being blind. And when you stop being blind, You begin to see the patterns, not with your eyes, but with something deeper, the heart, the mind, the soul. So keep asking questions, keep listening, keep wondering, because in a universe this vast, silence is never empty and mysteries are never accidents. They are invitations, left like fingerprints from a truth too big to speak. And one day, when we are ready, we will understand. Until then, let the mystery live. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next video.